Welcome to the museum. Have you ever been here before?
We have never been here.
Well, I'm so excited that you wanted to come and stop by, learn a little bit about local racing history. This museum was built in 1989, so you're standing in the original section that started at that time. This is the organization that was originally the Williams Grove Old Timers, and that group started in 1974. They started as a group of enthusiasts who wanted to honor the drivers, the car owners from the 30s and 40s. So it was started by Jack Gunn, who was the promoter of Williams Grove at the time. And they started having conventions at the Williams Grove Speedway every year. And then by the early 1980s, they wanted to build a museum. This was their dream. So they thought of coming here to Lattimore Valley. And if you come over here, I'll show you why. In the 20s and 30s, there was a racetrack here at the Lattimore Valley Fairgrounds. So the track was built around 1927, and it corresponded to the start of the Lattimore Valley Fair. And if you look at the top, and you can maybe zoom in here, you can see a lot of the original parts from those race cars and races in the early 20s and 30s that we found when we started to do excavations to recreate the track in the early 1980s. So this was the dream of the founders of the Williams Grove Old Timers, was to find a site to build not only a museum, but also an exhibition track for vintage race cars. And they came here to Lattimore Valley because it was a well-known area where there had been races in that period of the interwar period. So you can see in these photographs and in some of the memorabilia here that the guys that were racing here in the 1930s, from 1937, 1939, they were known as outlaws. They're the original outlaws. Why was that? They weren't part of the AAA series. They were racing independently and sometimes racing against drivers that competed in AAA, but in these outlaw races, they'd race under fake names. So you have guys that are just starting out, competing with some of the top drivers on the East Coast. And some of the most interesting things, I think, in this case are these bottles down here. The local dairy supported the racetrack by offering their dairy truck as the ambulance. So when someone was hurt, they would be transported to the local doctor or hospital in the back of the dairy truck. Here you can see a car and a new portrait that we have recently commissioned of Lynn Paxton. Lynn Paxton, many of you probably know, is a big name in sprint car racing in central Pennsylvania. He was one of the top drivers in the 1970s and early 1980s. And he was also a racing historian. He loved to learn about racing history, tell stories about these drivers from the early period. So he was one of the founding fathers and the inspiration behind the formation of the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. He took what was just kind of a social club, the Williams Grove Old Timers, and turned it into a 501c3 nonprofit, which became then the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. And he was one of the main proponents to keep the organization going after Jack Gunn passed away in 1980. He realized that what they were doing was significant. It wasn't just getting guys together to bench race, it was getting guys together to show vintage race cars, to bring together memorabilia, and preserve those stories of racing past. So what he did then was, it was his vision to have this museum. And he started fundraising then in the early 1980s to figure out ways that we could have a museum here on this site. The organization, the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing, officially formed then as a nonprofit in 1981. And one of those first initiatives then was to buy this property, the home of the historic Lattimore Valley Speedway. So originally they bought 24 acres down over the hill and started to work to uncover that historic track. By 1985, if you come over here, they had revived the Lattimore Valley Fair. So the fair originally started in 1925 and operated up until kind of that period of the Depression. But in 1985, it reopened under the guidance and promotion of the Williams Grove Old Timers and was a community event, but also a way to spread knowledge and fundraise for the construction of this museum. So Lynn Paxton was foundational along with a few other members, such as Carl Swigert and Bill Wright, to want to build this museum. And a lot of the things that those original founders collected are still on display in our museum today, which is kind of incredible. So let me take you around and we can see some of those things that are part of our collection here. This is our original gallery, the phase 1 of the museum, which opened to the public at the 1989-1990 period here. And you can see that this is where we display all of our sprint car and midget history. So the first row is midget cars from that period, beginning in the late 20s, 30s, and going into the 50s. And then in the back row, we have the progression of your modern sprint cars, from those big cars of the interwar period to the wing cars that you recognize if you go to Williams Grove, Lincoln, Baths, the tracks in the area today. So if you walk around, you can see that we have cars from a lot of different speedways across the Mid-Atlantic. Where the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing, our focus is on racing history in Pennsylvania, as well as surrounding areas, so states such as New York, Maryland, New Jersey. And this is an interesting car. This is a 3/4 midget that was raced by Mario Andretti. You can see his name there on the front of the hood. So this was his original first open wheel ride that Mario Andretti raced in. A lot of people know him from Indy, but a lot of people don't know that he was from Pennsylvania and had his start here in open wheel racing in the area. We can see too, as we go along, the technical evolution of the cars and the different types of engines that they were trying. We have outboard engine here, so thinking about boat engines. We have a motorcycle engine, putting different types of airplane engine into cars, seeing what worked. So this is a history and a story of technological tinkering, right? Just trying different things, collaborating, seeing what worked on the track, and then trying to incorporate that into different types of race cars. This one here is a car that's on loan to us, but this was a midget car that raced on the Nutley Velodrome. So we have a new exhibit upstairs that talks about the development of board track racing and the fact that people were racing on different types of surfaces, not just dirt, throughout different periods of history. So during that period of the late 1930s, there were tracks that were coming up, especially for midgets, that were purpose-built and constructed in more urban areas. That allowed racing to expand to new groups of spectators. You would have midget racing in places like Yellow Jacket Stadium in Philadelphia and areas of the Bronx in New York that were happening multiple nights a week. You could go to races and you could walk there or get there on public transportation, which is incredible. So some of these guys would participate in midget racing a few nights a week, and then on the weekends they'd hit the dirt tracks and race in big cars. And one of the guys that was doing both in this period of the 30s and 40s was Tommy Hennerschutz. And he's a name that a lot of people would probably recognize if they grew up in races in the area. Tommy is the guy that won the first race at Williams Grove Speedway in 1939. And he was also one of the first drivers to have a corporate sponsorship. You can see he's sponsored by Miracle Power here. And this is a recreation of his garage. Tommy lived in Oley, Pennsylvania, and when he retired, he was one of those founding members of the Williams Grove Old Timers and was active in this organization throughout the 1990s. And you can see this picture over here is what his shop actually looked like. So we were able, through the work of Lynn Paxton and other founding members and Tommy's generosity, to get some of the same lathes and equipment that came from his original garage and install it here exactly how he had it. So you can see the pictures of all his different cars were the windows in that original picture. Our garage here is set up kind of as a mirror of his original garage. Tommy was doing a lot of fabrication by hand during the period of even the 40s and 50s when he was racing after World War II. And he was also part of then a network that were working together. He could create some things in his shop, but he was also patronizing people like Hiram Hillegas. We have a display of his over here. Ken Hickey, the engine builder, to make sure that he had everything that he needed for his race car throughout the season. So if you wanted to, you could spend hours, right? Just going through all the different cases, checking out all of the artifacts that we have on display. If you want to, there's even some Easter eggs here. Any idea who this is sitting in Tommy's car outside of the concession stand, the front stretch at Silver Spring Speedway?
I have no idea.
Jeff Gordon, a young Jeff Gordon, participated in a race at Silver Spring in 1989. And there he is sitting in the very car you see here that was on display that night at the races.
Wow.
If you walk around here, there's also a lot of racing history in our area that people have kind of forgotten about. And one of those that you might not recognize is the fact that we all know Milton Hershey, right? We all know Hershey Park, but Hershey Stadium, where they now have concerts, was originally built as a purpose-built midget track. So Milton Hershey had an interest in automobile racing. It was really big at that period of the late 30s, and he thought, hey, this is another way to bring people in to the Hershey area. So he built a track at that Hershey Stadium, and they raced midgets there in 1939, and then at successive periods all the way up into the 1980s. So if you think about it, Williams Grove Speedway and Hershey Stadium opened the same week in 1939, both offering races to the local community. And each year now, there's a Hershey Sprint Car Experience that's coming up here. I think it's the first week in May this year, where the World of Outlaws have partnered with the Milton Hershey School, and they allow then the World of Outlaw drivers to line up at Hershey Stadium and meet with members of the community, as well as the Milton Hershey students. So they have a joint program now to help teach the students about technology and various careers that you can have in technology. Automobile racing is, of course, one of them. So the Easter Museum always goes every year. A lot of our members have vintage cars. They allow the kids to sit in their cars. We can kind of talk about the evolution of racing history, as well as getting the kids to meet with contemporary drivers, which is pretty cool. And this is our second garage installation that we have. We already talked about the one of Tommy Hennerschitz. And when Tommy Hennerschitz won the first race at Williams Grove in 1939, the car that he was driving was owned by this guy, John Gerber. So John Gerber was originally from Iowa, and he was one of those first guys at that early period of the 19-teens, 1920s. He's starting to tinker with things he can find on his farm. He's incorporating tractor parts, signs, old metal that he has around his farm into race cars to race. And he comes then to the East Coast to be able to compete in races here as well. So we have a lot of his memorabilia on display to document the fact that racing was regional, but it also had a national interplay and exchange, even in that early period of the 20s and 30s. Here's a model that someone made of Williams Grove Speedway. And behind it then is one of the original signs. I love this. It has a great Art Deco feel that was installed to attract people to the races. So Williams Grove was originally a destination kind of for picnics and families before the racetrack was constructed there in 1939. It's a purpose-built speedway. It's not one that was already existing in a fairgrounds where they had horse races and then converted to racing automobiles. This one was built specifically to offer automobile racing. We do try to represent a lot of the tracks in the area that we have cases for that are of interest. We have a lot of visitors that come in that have a family connection to racing. They grew up going to a local track, or they had a relative that raced. So we try to represent them, those tracks and those different area interests through the individual cases that you see here. And a lot of great photographs, ticket stubs, other things that you wouldn't find anywhere else have been preserved. A lot of times people ask me, well, how did you get here? And this is my heritage and my background. I grew up going to Silver Spring Speedway. My parents owned the track and were promoters there. So racing has been in my blood for 4 generations. My great-grandfather owned that property and was behind the original construction of the track and early promotion, and then it was passed down to my grandparents and parents. So here we have a display that's set up for Hiram Hilligus. He was a race car fabricator after World War II. And he's one of those first people that were taking World War II surplus, extra aluminum that you could get after the war, and trying to figure out how to make that stuff into race cars. You can see the wooden bucks up above and the mallets that we have here. So he's hand forming all of these tails and all of these parts, welding everything and then selling the parts. We have a price list over there where you can see that you could buy a complete car or just extra parts for your racing season. Several of the top drivers in the area, including Tommy Hennerschitz, patronized Hillegas. So he was in Allentown, Hennerschitz is in Ole. There's this consumer connection. And also a technological innovation. People are going around just like they still do today, talking in shops, chatting, what happened on Friday night, you know? What happened to this car? What can we improve on? And thinking through those technological innovations, certainly not in a vacuum, but within a community of innovators. We're trying to represent all different types of automobile racing and motor racing here at the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. And one of the things that you might just overlook if you're not looking up when you walk through here is this solar car from Messiah College. So they were generous enough to donate this to us, thinking about a lot of colleges having programs that help train students on how to innovate and create new sorts of technology and be able to compete across the country to do so. We have our wall of engines, thinking about the innovations to engine technology throughout the 20th century, and then various different types of drag racing cars here as well. So if you walk up the engine line, Ford Model T, the Chevrolet brothers, some of the creations that they're doing for racing in that period of the 20s and 30s. John Gerber, we talked about his garage and thinking through the innovations that he was making in order to participate. And then this era where you could take backyard, you could be a backyard racer, you could go to the local junkyard, you could find old engines and parts and be able then to participate in terms of putting together your own car if you had enough technical knowledge or help to do so. So this is the drag racing area. If you're thinking about early drag racing and the formation of the NHRA here, we have that kind of traced out for that period of the post-war interest. Growing interest in automobile culture in general then pours over. You have that era of street racing and then wanting to have that more formalized in tracks. And that is the formation then of the NHRA during that period. A lot of the early memorabilia from tracks in the area and drivers. We try to be inclusive of all different types of motor racing, and we think of motor racing even beyond automobile racing here. We have the history of racing with motorcycles as well as snowmobiles. We have things about soapbox derby racing, so ways where kids were getting involved at an early age, and working then to try to represent hill climbs and street racing as well. So not just thinking about dirt track racing, although that's kind of where we started from, obviously, since we were involved originally as the Williams Grove Old Timers and thinking about preserving just the history of Williams Grove. And look at how it's expanded from there. It's incredible. We're thinking too, not just about drivers, but also different types of industries that develop. Stahl is a big name that came out of York, building different headers as well as slicks and tires for not only drag racers, but also for sprint cars. So there's another crossover there. Kenny Weld is a big name in sprint car history. He would patronize Stahl. So thinking through how these innovations are crossing and the conversations that are going on through different types of racing as well. So this is a business history, right? A small business history that becomes a national name and someone that was well respected from Pennsylvania. Alison and Jim Lee, we have their display over here. Alison Lee was one of those. She was a car owner. She co-owned cars with her husband Jim, but she was also a very competent mechanic. So she would work on the car and not just, sit in the grandstand and cheer everybody on. So she is a very active participant in racing, and it's great to have, I think, her displayed here. And we try to have other areas too. We have a uniform from Nicole Bauer, a sprint car driver, and she did a roundtable here. We've had roundtables on women in racing, trying to come at racing from multiple different angles and show people and inspire them that, kids of girls, boys, whatever, can all participate. Over the last couple years, we're working to make some changes and keep pace with technology here at the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. And one of those areas that we're upgrading currently is our theater. So we have a new large screen TV that's installed, as well as a touch screen. And when you come into the museum this year, if you haven't been here in a while, please stop back and see us. You can come to the touch screen and pick videos from our collection. We have a great group who've been working to digitize hundreds of films that we had, old VHS tapes, 8mm film, and we'll have those on a rotating basis here for you to be able to click through and explore different themes throughout racing history. So we'll keep you updated as those new videos become available. As you walk up the stairs, you can see all of the posters from our institutional history. Since 2023, we hosted the Hot Rod Annual, which is originally known as the Jalopy Showdown here at the Baltimore Valley Fairgrounds. So about 3 times a year, we host different types of cars, vintage sprint cars, as well as hot rods and jalopies on our track at the Baltimore Valley Fairgrounds. So make sure to check out our schedule and come out, see the cars. It's great to hear all of those different engines. It's incredible. So please do come to our convention. All of those posters are here on the right. You can see that we've been holding that event, as I said, downstairs since 1985. The original fair, and the fair will take place this year in late June. Over the years, the Eastern Museums had partnerships or formed partnerships with a variety of other racing organizations. So 2 of our partners that we have on display here is the Reading Fairgrounds Historical Society, and they maintain these cases over here to document the history of Reading Speedway. So they don't have their own museum, but they do have a trailer with a display of Reading Speedway that they take out to events. So do check them out as well. Additionally, we're partners with the Flemington Speedway Historical Society, and they are another group that come in and maintain this case to preserve their own history. So working with local partners and existing current tracks, as well as tracks that are part of that Ghost Speedway legacy, to make sure that those stories are preserved here at the museum. The history of modifieds at Fleming and Reading are represented here upstairs, and we're very lucky to have this car on loan from Bobby Gerhardt's family.
What are the hours that you're open?
We are open currently during the racing season from this period of the spring open house, so April through early December to our holiday open house. We are open Fridays and Saturdays, so you can check us out Fridays and Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
What does it cost to walk through this museum?
Imagine this is free. So
wow.
Anyone can come in. It's free to the public. We do offer, or we accept donations, and we have some jars that we collect money throughout the year, but we really just work off the donations from the community and sponsorships from our partnerships that we have. So we maintain all of this for the benefit of the local public. Here's something interesting. If you look in this car, you can see that they have those dash plaques that say Williams Grove Old Timers. And one of the early things that the organization was trying to do was to create a registration system for vintage race cars. So we would start to register cars with the Williams Grove Old Timers. There's a registration form. You could add photographs to start to document vintage cars that were in the area. And now we have this whole database that we're trying to digitize of great information for people when they buy an old car. If you see those plaques in there, feel free to contact us and we can tell you what we have on file about your vintage car. If we walk into our upstairs auditorium, we have this area set up for events, and we do try to do educational programming throughout the year to offer a series of roundtables and other conversations with current drivers, current car owners, mechanics, as well as former drivers and historians. So we have a program of educational outreach. A lot of times we have a roundtable at least once a month, and we offer then conversations on various different types of racing. They're normally an hour and a half to 2 hours. You can come in, stay as long as you want, and learn something new. There's always a different part of racing history to experience here.
We noticed outside when we came in, there's a bridge.
There is a bridge. If you can see it out here through the window, this is the original bridge, well, the bridge from Williams Grove Speedway. So the bridge was installed at Williams Grove in 1947 and stayed there until 2023 when the bridge was taken down for the new bridge that you see at Williams Grove today across the backstretch, and that bridge was brought here.
Wow.
We really appreciate Kathy Hughes, the owner of Williams Grove Speedway, for her support of the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing, not only in donating the bridge to us, but sponsoring us throughout the year. EMMR hosts static displays where we bring vintage race cars into the infield at several races at Williams Grove, and we also host a Day at the Grove event there every fall. So here's a small display talking about kind of that technological evolution of helmets and safety that we're thinking about in open wheel racing throughout the 20th century. Those early guys were really, a lot of times they're referred to as gladiators, right? They're going out on the track, they're wearing their button-down shirts, their slacks. They're not wearing, big racing uniforms. They a lot of times didn't wear helmets or goggles, gloves, anything, no seatbelts in that early period.
What is the craziest helmet you have here?
They're really interesting. In my opinion, the craziest helmet is this red one, which is made out of paper mache. So some guy was wearing a helmet made out of layers of newspaper and glue to protect himself in racing in that early period of probably the 1920s. And it's fascinating, at that time, a lot of drivers didn't want to wear seatbelts because they felt that it was easier or better to get thrown from their car, not easier, better, than to stay in the car in case of an accident. So think about how much some of these cars weighed. You have a very complicated seatbelt. If you have it at the time, it's not like they have today where you just click and release. And if you were strapped in your car and you crashed and all of that weight from the car was on top of you, that was obviously a concern, as well as fire. If a car caught on fire, how quickly could you get out? So a lot of drivers during that time thought that it was better to be ejected from their cars as opposed to be crushed under them. And if you look at a lot of the newspaper articles of the accidents from that period, tons of head injuries, right? Because people are flying into posts, they're flying out onto the track, and you have a lot of fractured skulls, etc. But they're still wearing these very basic helmets for much of that interwar period. We're talking about racing in a lot of different capacities. We've talked about, not too much about Indianapolis, but we do have an Indianapolis garage over here. We have racing at the Bricks in Indy in those early years, and we also have racing at fairgrounds on dirt speedways. But what you might not know is that during that period of the teens and 20s, there's a group of people across the country who start to build board tracks. And you have tracks that were made entirely out of boards that allowed drivers to get higher speeds. These tracks were sometimes banked at up to like 38 degrees, and you could have then higher speeds than what you could get at those flat local dirt tracks. The boards were thought to be less expensive to construct than bricks or use of concrete, which those technologies were still developing at the time. So we put together a new exhibit that shows all of this history of board track racing across the country. If you come over here and check out our map, you can see that across the country between 1910 and 1928, there were 24 different board tracks constructed, tracks made out of wood. And if you look at where they're located, you can see a lot of areas with urban centers, areas that were accessible on the railroad, as well as major metropolitan areas. And if you look at the mileage, incredible. Tacoma, 2-mile track.
Of wood.
Of wood. And even the ones that are located in Pennsylvania, Uniontown, 1¼ mile, Altoona, 1¼ mile. These tracks were located all across the country and gave then opportunities for people to see the drivers that were the stars of the day compete in their own backyard. Think about it. You live in Altoona, not a huge metropolitan area, in the middle of Pennsylvania, and you're seeing drivers that just competed in the Indianapolis 500 come to your community. You're seeing the stars that then were on some of these early films that you would see at the movie theater. So when you go and you see those new newsreels at that time, they're also showing footage from these big automobile races. Altoona and some of the other ones, they were on the AAA championship circuit. So these are the same drivers, the same cars that are completing at the Indianapolis 500, coming to these local communities in Pennsylvania to race. This gallery is now the Kevin Gobrecht Gallery. So Kevin was a sprint car driver in the early 90s, and he passed away, unfortunately, in a racing accident. But his family have created a foundation, the Kevin Gobrecht Foundation, to continue on his legacy locally. So they sponsor fellowships for students as well as other community initiatives. And they very generously agreed to give a grant here to the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing, really to preserve Kevin's love of racing as well as his commitment to education in the local community. In addition to having our museum, we also have an extensive library collection. And what you're seeing here is our new research room. So this is an area where you can come in and sit, and if you have an interest in a specific period of racing history, we can try to pull for you things from our collection. So we have a lot of programs, we have historic newspapers, we have race records and results. And all of those are available to you by appointment. If you want to set up an appointment, tell us in advance what you're interested in. We can try to pull materials that we think will help you with your research. In here you can see our display that we have for Chris Economaki. Chris Economaki, you might recognize his name from Speed Sport News. He was a journalist as well as a reporter. And he then was a reporter on TV for like the ABC News, Wide World of Sports.
Wow.
His family donated a lot of his books and personal collection to the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing. So on the back row there you see a lot of his awards, photographs from his career, and all the books in these back cases were part of Chris's personal collection. So he was a racing historian. There's a great autobiography that he wrote about his career and his involvement in racing. And on the walls here you see a lot more of our Altoona collection. So a lot of those original newspapers from Altoona. This is a period when sports journalism was really taking off in that period of the 20s and 30s. There's a lot of interest in, the first celebrities, sports stars as celebrities. Think about Babe Ruth, think about baseball, but also racing stars as well. So what they were doing is the Altoona Tribune and Altoona Mirror, they were printing papers at the track and then trying to get that latest information out to people right away. Here are some of the earliest things in our collection. A lot of this is about our own institutional history, the formation of the Williams Grove Old Timers, and things from Williams Grove Speedway. This is our display, our Indianapolis display. And these garage doors here came off of one of the garages in the pit area at Indy. They wanted to upgrade their garages in that period of the 1980s, and they gave their doors then to various institutions, sold them, and we were fortunate enough to get a set. So they've recreated then this installation to make it look like an Indianapolis garage. Again, we think of Indianapolis as being this pinnacle for racing in the United States, which of course it was, but it's fascinating to trace the overlap then of those drivers that were competing in the Indianapolis 500, especially in that period of the 20s through the early 60s that were also involved in local racing. This car is a car that was owned by Sam Trailer, and it's known as a death car. And why it's called a death car is because 3 different drivers, you can see over here on this sign, during the period of the late 50s and early 60s, lost their life in this car. Fatal crashes at Trenton, Williams Grove, and Langhorne all took the life of drivers that were driving this, which begs the question, well, after the first guy died, maybe the second guy, but why would people keep getting in the cars? And I mean, these were really the top rides at that time. So there was always someone interested in stepping up, getting their chance, and being willing to take that risk, which is very incredible to trace then out some of these stories.
Alison, thank you for having us. We absolutely appreciate this. We never would have thought it was this big here.
Well, I'm so glad you guys could come out today, see the collection, and stop back. We always have new things to see every time you visit. It's free. We are open Fridays and Saturdays throughout the summer, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So stop on your way to the races or come check us out for one of our events. Our information is online, EMMR.org.
With that being said, like, subscribe, comment down below, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Built for horsepower, filmed full throttle.